Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Veils. Today we're going to talk about Hercule Poirot and the Painted Mask. In the heart of Venice, where midnight masquerades glitter with jewels and lies, a murder hides behind silk and feathers. A golden smear, a vanished partner, and a poisoned glass. This is no ordinary dance, but a deadly game. And when Hercule Poirot steps into the palazzo, every mask trembles, for beneath the painted smiles lurks the face of guilt. Stay with us until the end of this mystery. And don't forget to subscribe and like, because behind every veil, another secret waits to be revealed. Chapter 1. The Masquerade begins. The fog of Venice lay heavy upon the canals, a silver veil that shimmered in the pale moonlight. Lanterns flickered from balconies, their reflections trembling across the black water like the uncertain promises of a dream. Gondolas drifted silently, their oars dipping with the grace of shadows. And towering above the mist, with its marble facade glowing faintly beneath a tapestry of stars, stood the Palazzo Belladonna, a palace as old as whispered sin and as mysterious as the secrets it had swallowed over centuries. Inside, life thrummed with laughter, music, and the rustle of silks. For tonight was no ordinary gathering. Tonight, Venice itself seemed to hold its breath as the city's elite, cloaked in glittering disguises, converged upon the masquerade. Masks of every color, every feather, every glimmering jewel swept through the grand ballroom like a pageant of ghosts, each guest hiding a truth, each smile concealing a game. And among them, with the quiet certainty of a man untroubled by spectacle, walked Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian detective, immaculate as ever in his evening attire, adjusted the white bow tie at his throat and smoothed a gloved hand over his waxed mustaches. He was, as always, a study in fastidiousness, every crease sharp, every detail precise, every gesture deliberate. Though others sought anonymity in masks, Poirot required none. His reputation preceded him. His eyes, keen, penetrating, unerring, were his disguise, for they saw through all others. He had come, not by chance but by invitation. Count Belladonna, the host of this elaborate soirée, had insisted upon his presence. Why, Poirot did not yet know, but he suspected, as he often did, that beneath the glitter of the festivities lay a thread of tension, a faint discord in the music of the night. And Poirot, master of harmonies disrupted, was not a man to ignore such notes. The ballroom itself was a marvel. Chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, dripping light upon polished marble floors. Columns of alabaster rose high, wrapped in silken drapes of scarlet and gold. Musicians played from a gallery above, violins and cellos weaving together a melody that was both joyous and strangely foreboding, as though the very instruments understood what their masters did not. That joy and tragedy often dance hand in hand. Andrew's voice, were he narrating, would linger here, slowing, savoring, pausing, as though the listener too must take in the splendor, must let it wash over them like a tide of opulence before the inevitable storm. Poirot's eyes wandered. He noted a man in a wolf's mask laughing too loudly, his champagne untouched. A lady in a swan's feathers lingered by the window, her gaze fixed not upon the dancing couples, but upon the black waters beyond. A harlequin whispered urgently to a Venetian noble, whose jeweled mask glittered as though it might shatter under the strain of secrets. Poirot smiled inwardly. "It is always the same," he murmured under his breath. "The mask is never upon the face. It is always upon the heart." He moved further into the throng, greeted with courteous nods and curious stares. He did not dance, though many would have begged it of him. Poirot did not dance at masquerades. He observed. He listened. He let the theater of humanity unfold before his little gray cells. Each movement, each word, each careless glance added to the tapestry of deduction. The host appeared at last. Count Belladonna, tall, elegant, with a presence that commanded attention as effortlessly as a flame commands moths. His mask was gold, fashioned in the likeness of a Roman emperor, and it caught the candlelight with an almost blinding brilliance. He moved among his guests with practiced ease, his voice rich, his laughter resonant, though to Poirot's ears there was a note of weariness in it, like the final chord of an overture. When their eyes met, the Count approached at once, clasping Poirot's hand with surprising fervor. "Monsieur Poirot, Venice is honored. Truly, this night is brighter for your presence." Poirot inclined his head. "You are too kind, Count. But tell me, why such insistence that I should attend? Surely your ball has no need of a detective to make it sparkle." The Count's smile faltered for a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, but Poirot saw it. The eyes behind the golden mask flickered with something unspoken. Then the smile returned, broader, smoother, and the Count swept a hand toward the musicians. "Ah, buvez beauty requiert witness, n'est-ce pas? Perhaps, too, I thought it wise to have the keenest eyes in Europe among us. One never knows what shadows might slip into even the brightest of rooms." Poirot said nothing. He only adjusted his cuffs, his mustaches twitching ever so slightly, and let his gaze drift again across the sea of masked faces. The evening swelled. Dancers moved in glittering circles. Laughter pealed like bells, and the scent of roses and perfume mingled with the faint salt of the lagoon drifting through open windows. Yet beneath it all, Poirot felt it, that undercurrent, that subtle tightening of the strings. The little gray cells stirred. Something was amiss, something inevitable. And as the clock struck midnight, with champagne raised and music triumphant, a scream split the revelry like a blade. It came from the eastern wing of the palace. Guests froze, masks turning, jewels flashing, fans trembling. Another scream followed, higher, sharper, unmistakable, terror unmasked. Poirot was already moving. His stride was short but swift, precise, unhurried yet urgent. The crowd parted before him, as though they too understood that where Hercule Poirot walked, truth was certain to follow. Through corridors lined with portraits of stern ancestors, across a gallery where the music still faltered in confusion, Poirot led the way. He did not run. He never ran. But in the chamber at the end of the corridor, where the heavy doors now hung ajar, he stopped, and the sight within froze, even him in silence. Count Belladonna lay sprawled across the marble floor of his private study, his golden mask torn from his face, his eyes wide and staring. A dagger, ornate, Venetian, centuries old, was buried deep in his chest. Blood pooled beneath him, dark as ink against white stone. And upon the edge of the desk, smeared where a gloved hand had brushed against it, glimmered a streak of gold paint. Poirot's gaze narrowed. His voice, when it came, was quiet, almost reverent. "Ah," he said softly, "so it begins." Chapter 2, Masks and Motives. The palace had never felt so silent. The music had ceased, the laughter drowned, and even the Venetian night beyond the windows seemed to hush, as though the city itself dared not intrude upon the grim discovery. Guests crowded the doorway of the Count's private study, their masks tilted askew, their jeweled costumes shimmering in the flickering candlelight like phantoms reluctant to step forward. Fear is a cruel sculptor. It reshaped their painted smiles into rigid masks of its own. Poirot stood apart, not in horror, but in contemplation. His eyes lingered upon the dagger, the golden mask cast aside, the stain of blood spreading across the marble tiles. His little gray cells were already at work, weaving threads invisible to others, measuring not the brutality of the act but the precision of its placement. A killing such as this was not done in haste. It was crafted. It was chosen. "Stand back," as Salve plate, Poirot commanded gently, his hand raised in quiet authority. The room must remain untouched. One careless step and, poof, the truth may vanish beneath your feet. His words carried weight. Even in the chaos, no one dared disobey. The guests pulled away, though not without protestations, murmurs, and 1,000 whispered questions that filled the corridor like restless ghosts. It was then that Inspector Rinaldi arrived, summoned by the alarmed servants who had dashed into the Venetian night to find the city's watch. A tall man, broad of shoulder, His mustache, more unruly than Poirot's, was precise. Rinaldi pushed through the crowd with the bluster of authority and the heavy tread of boots that had seen too many darkened streets. "Out of the way!" he barked in Italian, before turning to Poirot with a stiff nod. "Monsieur Poirot, I should have guessed. When there is trouble in Europe, somehow you are never far." Poirot inclined his head, his mustaches twitching with the faintest smile. "But of course, mon ami, trouble and I, we are old acquaintances." Rinaldi crouched beside the Count's body, his eyes narrowing. Stabbed, clean, through the heart. No sign of a struggle. The Count was not a man easily surprised. Unless, Poirot interjected softly, he was surprised by a friend. The inspector grunted, rising. "We shall need statements. Every guest accounted for. Every servant questioned. None leave the palazzo until I say so." The announcement rippled through the guests like a stone cast into water. Panic stirred, outrage flared. A lady in emerald feathers gasped audibly, clutching her mask tighter. A gentleman in a raven's beak muttered a curse beneath his breath. The masquerade, once a stage for frivolity, had transformed into a prison, its velvet walls now lined with suspicion. Poirot let them speak, let the voices rise, let the fear reveal itself. People betrayed more in panic than in calm. Already he noted the trembling hands of the wolf-masked gentleman, the pallor of the swan-feathered lady, the harlequin's darting eyes. And always, he returned in thought to the smear of gold paint upon his glove, the clue that sang softly above the din like a solitary violin string. "Inspector," Poirot said at last, "perhaps we should begin at once. The longer we delay, the longer the lies have to settle into place." The interrogations began. They gathered the guests in the grand salon, a cavernous room where the fire still burned brightly, throwing tall shadows upon the gilded ceiling. The revelry was gone. Now the masks looked grotesque, the feathers funereal, the sequins like shards of glass in the firelight. Rinaldi began with brusque efficiency, questioning names, occupations, ties to the Count. Poirot sat quietly at his side, his eyes sharp, noting not merely the words but the silences between them, the twitch of a lip, the hesitation before denial. First came Signora Valentina, the lady in swan's feathers. A widow of considerable fortune, her beauty was matched only by her melancholy. "The Count was a friend," she said, her voice tremulous. "He admired my gardens. He would often speak of them, though," she faltered, glancing away, "though we disagreed upon matters of investment." Poirot's gaze sharpened. Investment. Money. Always a root of tragedy. Next, Signor Ruggiero, the wolf-masked gentleman whose laughter had rung false earlier. A businessman of questionable dealings, he spoke loudly, defensively, his words like barricades. "I had no quarrel with the Count. None. We shared wine only yesterday. He was to support my proposal for the shipping routes. Why would I harm him? It would ruin me." But Poirot noted the sweat upon his brow, the way his fingers tapped the armrest in nervous rhythm, the way his eyes darted whenever the dagger was mentioned. Then the harlequin, Francesco, a painter of some renown, flamboyant in gesture, passionate in tone. "The Count? He bought my work? Yes, but he stole my soul. He commissioned portraits, then hid them away in his vaults, never to be seen. Art is meant for light, not shadow, but murder." He placed a dramatic hand upon his chest. "No, monsieur, not even I could paint with blood." Rinaldi scoffed. "An artist spurned is a dangerous thing." And yet, Poirot murmured, "The artist speaks of shadow, of concealment. Curieux, n'est-ce pas?" On and on the questioning went. Politicians, aristocrats, merchants, lovers, rivals. Each draped in glamour. Each concealing a heart beating fast with fear. And through it all, Poirot listened, quiet as a cat among sparrows, letting the little gray cells drink deeply of detail. By the hour's end, suspicion lay upon everyone and no one. Rinaldi rubbed his temples in frustration, while Poirot stood by the window, gazing out across the moonlit lagoon. It was there that Andrew's narration would slow, deliberate, as Poirot's thoughts turned inward. A Count beloved, yet envied. Wealth that drew allies and parasites alike. Business ventures, artistic commissions, romantic entanglements. All threads tangled in a knot of gold and blood. But above all, one truth gleamed as clear as the moonlight on water. The dagger was not the weapon of opportunity. It was chosen. It belonged to the palazzo, a relic displayed in the Count's private collection. The killer had not brought death with them. They had plucked it from the heart of the house itself. And what of the smear of paint? Gold, bright, fresh. Not the dull patina of the Count's ancient mask, but the modern, garish paint used for masquerades. Someone's disguise had betrayed them. Someone had brushed too close in the moment of violence. Poirot's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "Always," he whispered, "it is the smallest of things that reveals the largest of truths." Behind him, Rinaldi growled, "You smile, Poirot. Do you see something I do not?" Poirot turned, his eyes twinkling. "Mais oui, my front. I see everything you see. Only, I see it a little differently. And I think," he paused, letting the silence hang like a curtain before revelation, "I think our murderer dances still among us." Gasps followed, sharp as knives. Guests drew back, eyes wide, whispers swirling like autumn leaves. The masks had become prisons now. Each face, half hidden, could belong to an angel, or to a killer. Poirot raised his hand. "Patience, mesdames et messieurs. The truth does not shout. It whispers, and I shall listen." The chapter closes here, with suspicion thick as incense, the golden smear gleaming in Poirot's mind, and the certainty that beneath the masks lay not only laughter but murder. Chapter 3. The Dance of Deceptions. The Grand Salon had changed its nature entirely since the death of Count Belladonna. Where once it had been filled with laughter, with champagne, with the whirl of gowns and the sparkle of masks, now it was heavy, suffocating, as though the very walls of marble and silk had absorbed the terror of the night. The musicians, under the brusque orders of Inspector Rinaldi, had resumed their playing, but the waltz that echoed through the gilded space was hollow, an echo of festivity rather than its heart. The dancers moved reluctantly, their steps uncertain, their smiles brittle. It was not joy that propelled them now, but fear. Fear of standing still, fear of being watched too closely, fear of the silence in which whispers became accusations. They clung to the music as drowning men cling to driftwood, and yet in their eyes, behind their painted masks, Poirot saw only dread. The little Belgian detective moved slowly among them, his gait precise, his expression unreadable. He did not join the dance. He never did. For Poirot, the dance floor was not a stage upon which to perform, but an arena in which the human heart revealed its contradictions. Each gesture, each laugh too sharp, each glance too swiftly turned away was a step in the choreography of deceit. He saw Signor Ruggiero, the wolf-masked businessman, twirling his partner with an almost violent energy, his laughter brittle and forced. Sweat clung to his temple, and though his hands gripped firmly at the waist of the woman he led, they trembled. Each turn of the music carried his eyes toward the door, as though escape was the rhythm to which his body longed to move. Poirot's mustaches twitched, and he murmured to himself, barely audible over the swell of violins, "A man who shouts his innocence to the world often seeks most of all to persuade himself." Not far away, Signora Valentina, the swan-feathered widow, drifted without a partner. She ignored every outstretched hand, every invitation with the serene cruelty of a statue. Her eyes, pale and reflective, were not upon the floor, nor upon the faces around her. They were fixed upon the great balcony doors that overlooked the canal. Beyond them lay the still water of Venice, dark as obsidian, and there, moored in silence, was a gondola. It rocked gently against the stone steps of the palazzo, but no gondolier waited at its stern. No, or dipped into the black surface. It waited, empty, like a hearse prepared in secret. Poirot followed her gaze, and his own eyes narrowed. Was it chance that a boat should linger there without a master? Or was it the work of careful arrangement, an escape route prepared for a guilty soul? He stored the thought carefully away, One more thread in the tapestry his little gray cells were weaving. Then came Francesco, the harlequin, painter of some fame, whose costume was as flamboyant as his gestures. He danced alone, deliberately, mockingly, his bright mask flashing beneath the chandelier as he leapt and spun. His laughter rang out, startling in its volume, shocking in its audacity. "What is life without drama?" he called, his arms spread wide. "And what is death but the final brushstroke?" Some guests gasped, others recoiled in disgust, but Poirot's gaze sharpened. There are those who laugh because they are careless, and there are those who laugh because silence terrifies them. Francesco's merriment was too sharp, too jagged, the brittle clinking of glass that would shatter at the slightest touch. Poirot moved along the floor, observing, always observing, when his eyes caught upon another peculiarity. The gentleman in the raven's mask was dancing with a lady in crimson satin. Tall, solemn, the raven moved with a kind of stiff reluctance, as though his body obeyed steps it did not wish to take. His partner clung to him with an eagerness that seemed almost desperate. She whispered into his ear, her hand gripping his shoulder with fierce intensity, and yet the man did not lean toward her. He recoiled ever so slightly, his body tightening with every word she spoke. Poirot studied the pair closely. He remembered the lady in crimson. Earlier in the evening, she had been across the room, laughing softly with Francesco, her hand upon his arm. How curious that she should appear here now, so suddenly, as though conjured from the air. When the dance ended, the raven turned to bow to her, but she was gone, vanished. One moment she had been pressed against him, the next she had slipped into the crowd, swallowed by masks and feathers and jewels. Poirot's mustaches quivered with interest. A phantom partner, or perhaps not a phantom at all, but an impersonation. Who had she been? And was she truly the same woman he had seen earlier? In Masquerade, identity was as fluid as the music. One could appear to be anyone, and so too could one vanish without trace. In that fluidity, a murder could hide its steps perfectly, not because no one had seen, but because everyone had. The thought had barely formed when the second calamity struck. A cry, sharp and sudden, pierced the music. Guests turned, masks swiveling, fans snapping shut. There, near the long banquet table, Signora Valentina staggered, her hand clutching at her throat. The goblet of wine she had held slipped from her fingers, spilling crimson across the marble, as she collapsed into the arms of another guest, her swan feathers trembling like the broken wings of a dying bird. Panic surged at once. Rinaldi was quick, snatching the fallen goblet, raising it to his nose. His jaw clenched. "Poison," he spat. The wine was poisoned. The room erupted. Shrieks echoed. Some guests pressed toward the doors demanding release. Others crowded around the widow, desperate to see, to know. She was not dead. The poison had been weak, diluted, but it was enough to strip the color from her cheeks and to leave her breathing in shallow gasps. She was carried to a couch, attendants fanning her as if air could undo what malice had brewed. Poirot crouched beside the goblet. His gloved finger touched the rim delicately, lifting the faint shimmer of powder that clung to it. He sniffed not at once. Oui, poison, but not enough to kill, only enough to frighten, enough to warn. A warning. Rinaldi barked, his heavy mustache bristling. Who warns with poison? This is madness. Poirot rose, his expression grave, his eyes scanning the gathered crowd. A murderer warns, Inspector, when they fear their secret is known, when they suspect a witness has seen something they should not. The implication fell like thunder upon the salon. Guests turned their masked faces toward the widow, some with pity, others with suspicion. Had she been targeted because she knew the truth, or had she drunk from the wrong goblet? A victim of chance in a larger game? The whispers grew, filling the chamber with a susurration of dread. But Poirot's mind was elsewhere. He thought of the way her eyes had lingered on the gondola below, of the phantom lady in crimson, of the feathered masks and the hurried laughter. Something small, something fleeting had brushed across Signora Valentina's gaze at midnight. Something she had not yet spoken. and someone feared she might. The music faltered, died, then resumed again, but it could not drown the tremors of unease. The masquerade was unraveling, the glamour shredded. And still, Poirot held his silence, letting the little gray cells turn. At last, he returned to the Count's private study. Alone, he let his eyes sweep once more across the chamber of death. The desk bore more than the smear of gold paint. It bore scratches, faint but telling, as though something had been dragged hurriedly across its polished surface. Not a weapon. The dagger still protruded from the Count's chest. No, this was something else. A goblet, perhaps, or a mask, or something hidden and taken away. Poirot bent lower, studying. His gaze shifted to the floor, to the hand of the Count, outstretched, frozen in death. There, caught against the stone, lay a single feather. Scarlet, edged in gold. Poirot lifted it gently, holding it to the light. It shimmered, delicate, damning. He smiled faintly, the smile of a man who has glimpsed the edge of the truth. "The phantom partner," he whispered. "She has left behind her calling card." When he returned to the salon, the crowd fell silent. He raised the feather between his fingers, letting the firelight paint it with brilliance. His voice was soft, but it carried across the room, clear and unshakable. "Mesdames et messieurs, the dance of deception is not yet done. Among us, a guest wears more than a mask of velvet. Among us, one has worn the mask of another, to deceive, to vanish, to kill. And it is this deception, more than the dagger, more than the poison, that has spilled blood tonight." A collective gasp rose, sharp as broken glass. Faces turned, whispers surged. Fear clung to every jeweled collar and every painted smile. The masquerade was broken. The masks were no longer ornaments. They were prisons. Poirot's gaze swept across them all, and his mustaches quivered. The murderer is clever, yes. But Hercule Poirot is here, and no mask, however beautiful, can deceive the little gray cells. Very soon, the truth will dance unmasked. Chapter 4: Unmasking the Truth. The hours bled together in the palazzo, the once glittering masquerade, now a prison of suspicion. The revelers remained trapped, Inspector Rinaldi having ordered the doors barred and the gondolas dismissed. Outside, the waters of Venice lapped softly against the stone, patient and eternal, as though the city itself had seen too many such nights before to be troubled by one more corpse. Inside, the air grew heavy with sweat and perfume, with candle smoke and fear. Masks that once delighted now oppressed their wearers. Feathers itched against damp skin. Velvet clung to trembling hands, and every whisper behind painted lips was tainted with dread. The murderer was among them, moving unseen, and none dared to meet another's gaze for too long lest suspicion take root. Poirot, however, thrived in such confinement. Where others saw claustrophobia, he saw opportunity. To close the cage, mon ami, he had once told Hastings, is to make the birds sing. And so he walked, patient, meticulous, his eyes darting from mask to mask, every gesture catalogued, every glance filed away. The feather he had found weighed lightly in his pocket, but in his mind it was heavy indeed, a token of guilt, a sliver of truth amid the painted lies. Inspector Rinaldi paced furiously, his boots echoing on the marble floor, his temper rising with each minute of fruitless interrogation. He had pulled aside the wolf, the harlequin, the raven, demanding alibis, demanding motives, but each man offered him only defiance or hollow excuses. The ladies fared no better beneath his questioning. Their voices trembled, their fans fluttered nervously, but no confession spilled forth. At last, red-faced and sweating, he turned to Poirot. "This is useless," he growled. "These people are liars to the last breath. They will not break." Poirot raised a finger, calm, almost amused. "But they will break, Inspector. Already they crack, already they splinter. You see only the surface, the painted mask. Hercule Poirot looks deeper. Beneath every mask, there is the twitch of an eye, the hesitation of a hand, the sigh of guilt. Soon the mask will slip." It was then that a servant appeared, pale and stammering, announcing that Signora Valentina had asked to see Poirot alone. She had been taken to a smaller chamber off the grand hall, away from the prying eyes of the guests, to recover from the attempt upon her life. Poirot inclined his head gravely, excusing himself, and followed the trembling footman into the dim-lit chamber. There she lay upon a chaise, feathers still trembling faintly in her hair, her face ashen but her eyes fierce with something that was not fear but knowledge. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, her voice dry as parchment, "they will kill me. They have already tried." Poirot sat beside her, his gaze kind but penetrating. "Courage, madam. You are not yet dead, and you will not die. Not while Hercule Poirot is here. But tell me, what is it that you saw?" Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to him. She lowered her voice further still. "It was at midnight when the Count fell. I was not far from the study. I saw—" She broke off, swallowing hard. Poirot leaned closer, urging gently. "I saw someone leave," she continued, the words trembling on her lips. "A lady in crimson, her mask gold. She slipped away from the Count's chamber when the music rose. She moved quickly, too quickly. I thought perhaps she hurried to join the dance, but then I saw the paint upon her gloves, gold that smeared as she brushed the wall. She wiped it hastily, but I swear I saw." Poirot's eyes gleamed, for this was the thread he had sought. He placed his hand gently upon hers. "Merci, madame. You have done bravely. Rest now. Say nothing more. You have given Poirot what he needs." But as he left her chamber, he felt the eyes of others upon him. Someone else knew what Valentina had revealed, or at the very least suspected it. And if the attempt upon her life had failed once, it would surely be tried again. Back in the salon, Poirot stood before the assembly. The music had long ceased. The masquerade was finished. The guests sat or stood in uneasy clusters, their masks now more burden than pleasure. He let the silence stretch, commanding the room not with volume, but with presence. When at last he spoke, his voice was soft, yet it carried to every ear. "At midnight, Count Belladonna was slain. We have spoken of daggers, of poisons, of gondolas waiting in the night. But tonight, my friends, the true weapon is deception. One among you has worn a mask, not merely upon the face, but upon the soul. One among you has pretended to be what they are not, and in that pretense lies murder." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. The harlequin laughed too loudly. The wolf cursed under his breath. The raven stiffened. Poirot continued, relentless. "I have in my possession a feather, scarlet and gold, torn from the costume of the phantom who danced and vanished. I have the word of a witness, brave enough to speak despite danger, who saw the smear of paint upon the hand of the guilty. And I have the certainty of my little gray cells, which do not lie. Mess Amos, the circle of suspects is narrowing. The mask will fall." The room quivered with fear and excitement. Poirot allowed the tension to linger, then turned abruptly, pointing to the balcony doors. "You, Inspector, search the gondola that waits below. I think you will find evidence not of a gondolier's hand, but of a murderer's flight. For the guilty one prepared an escape, yet did not take it, because the dance of deception was not yet complete." Rinaldi barked an order, and two of his men hurried out. The guests whispered, some clutching at their masks, others shrinking into corners. Poirot folded his arms, his eyes glittering. "Patience, mesdames et messieurs. The hour of revelation approaches. Already the truth strains at its mask, desperate to be free. Soon we shall see not painted velvet, but the face of guilt itself." Chapter 5. The Painted Mask Revealed. The air within the palazzo had grown unbearable. The chandeliers still blazed, their flames flickering against crystal and marble, but their light felt cruel, unrelenting, as though even the candles themselves demanded the truth. The guests were silent now, clustered in uneasy knots, their masks askew, their jewels dulled by sweat and fear. Outside, the waters of Venice lapped in patient rhythm, as if the city waited for the confession that must inevitably come. And at the center of it all stood Hercule Poirot, immaculate, precise, every detail of his attire as perfect as the order of his little gray cells. He had allowed the silence to grow thick, suffocating. He had allowed dread to swell in every breast, allowed the guilty to squirm beneath their own disguise. And when he spoke, it was with the quiet authority of a man who already knows. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, the masquerade has ended. The music has ceased, the dance is done, and now it is time for truth. A murmur rippled across the salon, quickly hushed as his eyes swept over them. He took a step forward, his hands clasped neatly before him, his voice calm but unyielding. At midnight, Count Belladonna was found dead, the dagger through his heart. At first, it appeared to be the work of passion, perhaps a quarrel, perhaps a theft. But no, the truth is subtler, more dangerous. The crime was committed not by force of anger, but by force of deception. A mask was not merely worn upon the face, but upon the very identity of the murderer. He drew from his pocket the feather, scarlet, edged with gold. It shimmered in the candlelight, fragile, damning. This, Amos, is the first key. A single feather, torn in the struggle, belonging not to any costume worn openly tonight, but to one who disguised themselves as another. The phantom partner who appeared upon the dance floor, who whispered words and vanished as the music ended. This feather tells us the truth. Someone among us played a role they had no right to play. Gasps sounded, sharp and fearful. Poirot turned his gaze, letting it rest upon each guest in turn. The wolf danced too fiercely, yes. The harlequin laughed too loud, oui. The raven recoiled from the partner he did not know. And the swan, poor lady, saw what she should not have seen and was nearly silenced with poison. But these are distractions, Amos. Red herrings. The true culprit is the one who believed themselves clever enough to hide behind a mask of another, who thought they could slip into the Count's chamber unnoticed, strike, and then rejoin the revelry unmarked. But even the cleverest criminal forgets. The eyes of Hercule Poirot see all. He turned then, slowly, deliberately, his finger rising to point. Francisco, the harlequin, the painter, it is you. A collective cry went up. The harlequin staggered back, his painted mask flashing in the light, his laugh breaking from his lips, but hollow, desperate. Absurd, he cried. You accuse me because I jest? Because I laugh where others weep? Nonsense. Poirot's mustaches twitched with disdain. You laugh, yes. You mock, yes. But your laughter is not of joy. It is of fear. You thought to distract, to deflect. You thought your flamboyance would mask the trembling of your hands. But it is your art that betrays you. The golden smear upon the Count's desk was not paint from his hand, but from yours. The gilded mask, the crimson costume, they were not worn by the lady in truth. They were yours, donned in deception. You disguised yourself as another guest, slipped into the study, and when the Count turned, surprised, you struck. Swift, precise, through the heart. An artist's stroke, oui, but of murder. Francesco's hand shook. He tore away the harlequin mask, his face pale, his eyes wild. He would have ruined me, he shouted suddenly, his voice breaking. Belladonna promised me patronage, fame, fortune, and then he betrayed me. He mocked me, threatened to expose my debts, to cast me aside. I cannot allow it. I had nothing left but my art, and he meant to take even that. So yes, I killed him. I killed him. Chaos erupted. Some guests screamed. Others recoiled in horror. Still others surged forward in anger. Inspector Rinaldi barked orders, his men seizing the painter, dragging him down as he struggled and spat. His mask lay upon the marble floor. Its painted smile cracked, its colors dulled. Poirot raised his hand, and the tumult subsided. His eyes swept across the assembly, stern, commanding. You see, Amos is always so. The murderer believes themselves clever, believes they can dance among the innocent unseen. But they forget there is no disguise that can hide the truth from the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot. The mask may glitter, but beneath it the face of guilt is always revealed. And so it ended. Francesco the painter, the harlequin of false mirth, was led away in chains. The guests, shaken and pale, removed their masks at last, revealing not the splendor of nobility but the frailty of men and women who had stared too closely at death. The music would never resume. The masquerade was broken beyond repair. And as the gondolas returned to bear them away into the Venetian night, they whispered still of the little Belgian detective, of his sharp eyes, his twinkling mustaches, and his mind that missed nothing. Poirot stood alone upon the balcony for a moment, gazing out upon the dark canal, the water glinting faintly in the starlight. "It is always the same," he murmured softly. "The truth hides, but not for long. Sooner or later, the mask falls." He turned then, his silhouette framed in the golden light, and stepped back into the palazzo, where order had been restored. And thus concludes Poirot and the Painted Mask, a tale of deception, of pride, of art and death in the heart of Venice. But Mies Amos, this is not the end. Oh no, for there are always more mysteries, always more masks to be torn away, always more secrets for the little gray cells to unravel. If you have walked with Poirot through this night of shadows, if your heart has raced with each revelation, then I invite you, stay with us. There will be more murders, more masquerades, more truths waiting behind the veil. Subscribe now, join us, and together we shall step once more into the world of Hercule Poirot, where no mystery is ever too great and no mask ever too perfect to escape his eyes.